Hello, please take your seats. We're about to get started. Thank you. Welcome, everyone, both in the room and online. My name is Sebastian Burka, and I'm the Executive Director of the Stigler Center. Today, we're happy to host the first session of our two-day mini course, Can Antitrust Save Democracy? Insights from Europe, with Professor Maciej Bernatt, where we explore the relationship between antitrust law and democracy with a focus on media markets. Thank you, Maciej. We look forward to your insights. This event is part of our Minicourse series, where we host leading scholars and experts from different fields for seminars on cutting-edge ideas not typically included in the traditional curriculum. I would also like to highlight a special upcoming event. If you're in Chicago next week on April 30th, you and your friends are invited to join us here at the Harpert Center for our open house, where you can meet our global journalists in residence, network with your peers, enjoy fun giveaways, and learn more about what we do and how you can get involved. We'll also have a special guest, so we hope you can make it. Feel free to check our website for more details, as well as our publication, promarket.org. And remember to subscribe to our Capitalism podcast. We have some swag out there at the registration table, I believe. Before we begin, please note we are on the record, live streaming, and we will post the event video on our YouTube channel later. If you have any questions for Professor Bernatt, we will have time at the end, so please wait for the microphone before speaking. We will have microphones in the room. As usual, views expressed by guests are their own, not those of the Stigler Center or the University of Chicago. Now, please allow me to briefly introduce our speaker today. Maciej Bernatt is the chair of the Department of European Economic Law in the Faculty of Management at the University of Warsaw. He is also director of the Center for Antitrust and Regulatory Studies and editor-in-chief of the Yearbook of Antitrust and Regulatory Studies. He teaches EU economic law, international and comparative competition law, as well as a course on business and human rights, among others. His most recent book is Populism and Antitrust: The Illiberal Influence of Populist Government on the competition law system, and it is available for purchase online. And now, without further ado, I turn it over to Professor Bernatt. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Yes. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for your kind introduction. I am very happy to be here. I'm spending 2 lovely weeks in Chicago, enjoying among others Hyde Park. So many thanks to Stigler Center for hosting me. So today I want to discuss the notion of democratic backsliding in the context of antitrust law and in the context of media markets. So my main the starting point, and I guess this is something, since you are here, you might agree with me, is that the democracy crisis, the crisis of constitutional or liberal democracy, is one of the biggest challenges today, and we can see democracies being under challenge in many countries globally. So one of the questions you may ask is really how these problems we observe can be addressed, and whether the law, I am a lawyer, can do anything about it. My principal focus during this two-day course is to focus on the actual impact the rule of populist governments had on democracy, particularly when it comes to media markets, and I will explain this. And potentially, this will be more the focus of today. The question is whether competition laws, or the title was, can antitrust save democracy? You know, a very big question. I will want to discuss a potential pro-democratic role of competition law in the context of media markets. And then also the question is, I guess you might be interested in this, what happens really at the level of states, like you may think of countries in Central and Eastern Europe, for example, Poland and Hungary, on which I focus on, but also the question is what the EU, what the European Union can do about it. As you know, European Union is I would say, a very sophisticated structure where you may have laws being adopted on the national level by member states, but there is, in some areas, EU, or in many areas, EU has a legislative powers and can pass the laws that are binding in member states. So the question is whether EU can help with some problems concerning democratic backsliding. By approach, I presume that you have some basic knowledge, but I will be focusing on Poland. And Poland was quite covered in media, also in the US. In the last 8 years, Poland was ruled by the government of Law and Justice Party. The head of this party is Jarosław Kaczyński. And during this period, according to many commentators, Poland went through the process of democratic backsliding. You could argue that I will try to show you that democracy was subject to erosion in Poland. Last October, we had elections and opposition won. And right now, Poland is, I will be not discussing this, but I'm happy to take questions, is right now we are going through the process of maybe restoring democracy and restoring rule of law, and Poland is quite an interesting case. Hungary is in a way similar, in a way it's different. Since 2010, we have in power a government of Fidesz party. The head and the prime minister is Viktor Orban, and it seems that his political power is very much entrenched, and there is, at least at the moment, it doesn't seem that this Polish scenario is likely to happen. So this is my focus, but you need to remember, and this is the research on populism represents this quite well, is that if you would like to study other countries, you may sometimes argue that certain processes I identify in Poland and Hungary, they may exist also in other countries. Sometimes in the literature, you may find the term populist playbook. So actually, it's a global world, right? So also the politicians learn from one another and are inspired by one another, and so some of the processes may also exist elsewhere. Just to, since it is, I will be focusing on media market, just to give you the example. In 2007, Donald Trump allegedly ordered the US Department of Justice to challenge the acquisition of Time Warner, the owner of CNN and the competitor of Fox News, by AT&T. So the question was whether, there was a president asking antitrust agency to challenge the merger that was considered by this president to be problematic, since here we have CNN and competitor Fox News that is pro-Trump. So the question is whether you may have certain actions of antitrust institutions being politically driven, and these questions can also be asked when we discuss the case of Poland and Hungary. So today I want to focus. This is a plan for today and for tomorrow. How democratic backsliding looks like in the context of, particularly in Poland and Hungary, but also what economic processes we can observe. Then I will discuss how these processes are relevant for media markets, and I will focus on media pluralism, since potentially competition law can be helpful with respect to preserving media pluralism. And tomorrow I will talk more about solutions, focusing on competition law, and I will offer some ideas how competition law could be improved. And as an alternative, I will discuss regulation that is in place regulation that was recently proposed by the EU. There is a very interesting piece of legislation, really new from April, that is called EU Media Freedom Act. So let's move. So let me just say very briefly how I understand democracy, because this is the notion that is subject to different definitions. You can say that there is a narrow understanding and broad understanding. I focus on broad understanding, which goes beyond the majoritarian theory and includes the protection of civil liberties, media freedom, separation of powers, and respect for rule of law. So the idea is that democracy is not just a system in which you have elections and those who win govern the country, but there are also some other elements that are associated with a democracy. So we are talking about constitutional liberal democracy. For example, for me the rule of law, as I said, or protection of human rights is an element of such a broad definition of democracy. And this is important if we want to define this notion of democratic backsliding. Here you have a definition proposed by Professor Scheppele and Pech, where they define democratic backsliding as the process through which elected public authorities deliberately implement governmental blueprints which aim to systematically weaken, annihilate, or capture internal checks on power with the view of dismantling the liberal democratic state and entrenching the long-term rule of the dominant party. So this is linked to this broad understanding, because the idea behind is really to get rid of these elements in the democracy that protects a political system from a risk that a party or a group that win the elections will stay in power, for a longer time. So we can consider checks and balances, rule of law as part of it. And democratic backsliding is also interesting notion, because we are talking about a gradual process of reversal. So you need to understand that for example, I'm not discussing, Russia. This is for me an authoritarian state. I am the case of Poland, Hungary, maybe the US, who knows? It's a situation when we have a democracy that is quite well established, and then certain things start happening that weaken this democracy. So we are looking at a certain process of weakening of democracies. Briefly, what might be the reasons? And I really like what's from Viktor Orban. He's covering everything. So it's just I grouped some of them. My point is that if you look at what he's saying, you could say that the reasons may be seen of democratic backsliding above economic and non-economic. So he's talking about foreigners or foreign firms that are going to take everything in this country, in Hungary. He's talking about the risk to multicultural society. He's discussing the friction between national and globalist forces. he is talking about the need of protection of borders and traditional lifestyle. He's talking about the need to protect Hungary from an empire directed from Brussels. So in this case, he's referring to the European Union. He's criticizing the notion of liberal democracies, and maybe the quote I like in the US context, particularly interesting once he said the checks and balances is a US invention that for some reason of intellectual mediocrity, Europe decided to adopt and use in European politics. So he does not like the notion of checks and balances. But this is what he was, saying. The question really is how the rule, how the politics looks like once you have a populist government that is in power. And 2 years ago, it's 2 years now, I published a book in which I discussed how the actual rule by populist governments, with focus on Poland and Hungary, how it undermines democratic legal order and how it also affects competition law in terms of institutions and enforcement. So I am relying on this approach, discussing the actual processes. So this might be, if you think about the impact on the democratic legal order, this is what you see on this slide is in line with the notion of democratic backsliding I just discussed. But what's the result is a concentration of political power and, more broadly speaking, a rule of law crisis. And if you look how this is happening, and these are examples from Poland and Hungary, you can see certain processes. You can observe capture of constitutional courts. For those of you who don't know this, constitutional courts are responsible for reviewing the constitutionality of statutes with the constitution. So they are very important. In some countries, this constitutionality review is in the hands of Supreme Court. Some countries has separate constitutional courts. This is the case of Poland and Hungary. So this is once you capture constitutional courts, when the courts stopped reviewing the constitutionality of laws effectively, this may be quite an easy way to circumvent constitution and, for example, adopt the laws that would go against the minorities or adopt the laws that would undermine the independence of ordinary judiciary. So this is what happened both in Poland and in Hungary. For example, in Poland today, constitutional court is completely inefficient. It's fully captured by the previous government. It's the institution that seems to be lost, and it had a very good reputation before 2015. Other processes you can observe is dismantling of professional civil service. Different techniques used to capture independent courts. For example, introduction of early retirement age of judges. So you are kind of getting rid of older judges. This is what was happening. Disciplinary measures. For example, in case of Poland, there were disciplinary proceedings instituted against the judges that were proactively defending the integrity of judiciary in Poland, and some other elements what I mentioned, evasion of constitution and supranational legal norms, or some more specific like abuse in the use of data protection. Or if you're interested in any of this, I am happy to discuss this more in detail. And this is something that was quite covered and discussed in the literature of political scientists and constitutionalists. what I was interested in was how these processes are relevant for market economy, for the way in which markets operate. As I come from competition law perspective, competition law is traditionally seen to correct the way in which markets operate. So this is where my interest came from. And if you discuss, if you look at Poland and Hungary, you can see differences, but I would argue that at least when it comes to some markets, you can see a departure from liberal market-oriented vision of economy. Particularly, you see a growing role of state in the economy. For example, in the case of Poland, you see state-owned enterprises becoming more powerful. They are entering new markets. There is a consolidation on the market going on in which state-owned enterprises are involved. The other process is economic patriotism. So you kind of underline that, a Polish firm or a Hungarian firm is, or a Polish product is a better one, and maybe this is, happening everywhere. But then you introduce certain policies that arguably may have a protectionist nature, and this is happening in the EU. And the EU is about the EU internal market that is based on the idea of non-discrimination based on nationality. So you cannot discriminate, let's say, a German service in Poland for the fact that it is coming from Germany. The whole idea of the EU is against that. So what I see as a problem is that we observe a concentration of both political and economic power. So in case of Poland, I mentioned this SOEs, state-owned enterprises. In case of Hungary, I will show you some examples how it operates. But basically, this is a system. I would say I think patronage would fit here, where you have a certain group of private businessmen that are connected with Orban and with the ruling party, and so in a way, state and these firms kind of work together. And practice in case of markets, so I mentioned this SOEs, but other, these are examples from Hungary. Certain markets were nationalized and monopolized there. So, for example, school books or the market of cigarettes. I mentioned this acquisition and consolidation in case of Poland. It was happening particularly in the bank, media, and energy sectors. You could also argue that these new laws that are adopted, they don't offer sufficient procedural protection for the firms that are affected. So, for example, if you are a foreign firm in Hungary, the law can be introduced in such a way that you have a very limited chance to go to court and challenge the policies that affect you. And the idea of this course is to focus on media markets. So we have these processes, and I want to show right now how they are relevant, how this democratic backsliding concerning more a political system, and how these changes in economy I discussed, how they are relevant, how they are relevant for media markets. So the first thing is that you can see an important element of constitutional democracy are the safeguards against abuse of power by states. So independent courts are key in this respect. So if you think about the media that need to work in a good environment, having allies like independent courts is very important. And the same applies to NGOs, civil society, and autonomous academia. And I didn't mention that, but NGOs, civil society, and autonomous academia were were subject to processes that I would say weakened NGOs and civil society. So the case of academia, maybe you heard, it is actually an US university, Central European University in Budapest. It was on the basis of the law that was adopted by the Hungarian parliament, was basically forced to quit its educational operations in Hungary, was forced to move to Vienna. And the thing is that the academics working for the Central European University were very critical towards the changes that were happening that were taking place in Hungary. Another problem is, if you think about the media markets, in many countries you have regulatory supervision authorities, and these institutions that are supposed to safeguard media freedom are also captured, and they may abuse the power they have. So the case of Poland is you have a private TV station that is critical towards the ruling party, and it takes more than a year for this TV to have its concession for broadcasting being extended, and it seems it is happening only because of the pressure coming, among others, from the US. Another problem is that, and this is a technique that was used quite broadly in Poland, is imagine that you have certain institutions that are supposed to be independent, and the safeguards in terms of how these institutions operate are enshrined in the constitution. So it's difficult for the ruling government to kind of capture this institution very quickly. So what they do, they adopt the laws, and under these laws they establish a parallel institution that has very similar competences to the competences that this constitutionally enshrined body has. So, for example, in case of Poland, if you look at media markets, what Law and Justice government did was to establish National Media Council, and this enabled, and then this National Media Council was given a power to dismiss the members of the boards of public media. So it was quite a quick way to circumvent the existing institution, change the heads of the public media, and in such a way capture public media. I mentioned, I discussed these economic processes. They are relevant for media market. How? You may have firms that are linked to the government being involved in takeovers that lead to a change in the editorial line. The example in 2020 is there was a portal in Hungary, index.hu, which was at the time one of the last space where you had a content that was critical towards the government. So the takeover took place, and very quickly, so a pro-government businessman is buying this portal, and quickly this leads to the dismissal of editor-in-chief and the whole newsroom staff. I will discuss tomorrow the takeover concerning SOEs in Poland. Another question, another thing that is quite interesting is how advertisements are allocated. As you probably know, for media, you know, the income coming from advertisements is key. So if you manage to steer advertisement in certain direction, this may also affect the media landscape. Other risks that I would say are more specific for media markets are the questions concerning journalistic freedoms. Today in Polish Parliament, the Minister of Justice spoke. He was earlier an ombudsman, and he revealed that Pegasus, this is a spyware developed in Israel, was used in recent years in Poland in more than 500 cases. And among these cases, there are confirmed instances in which the spyware was used against journalists and against the members of the opposition parties. In Hungary, instead, you have so-called security laws that and that was a direct statement by one of the Fidesz politicians, that they were aimed to target left-wing journalists. Sometimes, and this is it is happening. It's also, I would say, kind of Russian-inspired, that NGOs and journalists are named as a foreign agents, and there is such a law in Hungary. But they are also, if you are an independent journalist, you may be attacked in the media and described as a foreign agent. The big thing, a big problem for a media landscape in countries that are subject to democratic backsliding is the question of polarization. So you basically, this is I think also the case of the US. I would be happy to hear your questions on that. But if you think that you have public media that are supposed normally to provide an, I would say, impartial content, once you have public media being captured, they tend to deliver such a content that is very divisive. So there is in public media, you can it's hard to argue that there is plurality of content. There are some issues, and here these are quite specific, so I will not discuss that. But the questions whether some investigations may be launched or some actions may be taken that could be seen as a censorship by the government. So imagine a state-owned enterprise that is the owner of gas stations all over Poland, a place where people buy press. And after a magazine publishes a documentary about Pope John Paul II's knowledge of child abuse within the Catholic Church, this newspaper is withdrawn from the newsstands in all these gas stations all over Poland. Or you may have, this is a case of Hungary, a harsh fine for a bookseller of a book that had a certain LGBT content. And it's really weird because it's really about that wasn't sufficient, that the book was not in the plastic cover, you know. So you may have a different techniques being used. And a very big problem, and something that seems to be difficult for the EU to be addressed, is a situation in which you have state funding that is supposed to be given to public media with respect to its public service. It is not really leading to a content that is truly public, if you think about public media, but it is rather used as a money to fund pro-government propaganda, and this is something that is very difficult to be challenged for under EU law. And what might be the result if we are talking about this these problems existing in media markets. Significant media bias towards ruling parties and the misuse of state resources hindered voters' ability to make informed choices. This is a report by international organization after Hungarian elections in 2002. So they claim that these things going on, it's not just about the problem for media as such, but this is actually affecting the democratic process. I found this is a very interesting study by two economists, Shade and Schutz. And what they are discussing is really how this changes in the economy, how they affected media markets in Hungary. So this is can you hear me? Yes. So this is a situation in which you have a newspaper that is called Metropole. This green line is a time when this Metropole is bought by a guy whose name is Simiczka, and he is at that time an ally of Orban, of the prime minister. So once he is buying this Metropole newspaper, what you see in red is the increase of funding this Metropole receives from state-owned firms. So you see state capital being, and it is for advertising. So you have a newspaper, it is bought by pro-governmental businessmen, and then lots of money from state-owned firms goes to this newspaper. That's another thing. We are talking about this Metropole and other newspaper called Magyar Nemzet. And here you see a situation. So in 2015, this Simiczka has an argument with Orban. He seems to be too independent to Orban. This is at least what you can get from the media. And you see that immediately after they split, the funding from state-owned enterprises that these two newspapers were receiving is going dramatically to the low. So there is a connection between economic power of the state, a certain political links between businessmen and the ruling government, and the money that is received by media. And this is maybe the most interesting. So this is the third graph they use, where they show that basically, so again, green is the moment when they disagree, then these newspapers, this is in red, they start to cover corruption in Hungary. So this is a third process that might be seen as a consequence. So once these magazines, are owned by someone who is getting on well with a prime minister, then these newspapers receive a lot of money, and they do not cover corruption. Once they stop receiving this funds, they start covering corruption. By the way, at some point, this Magyar Nemzet was closed because it didn't have sufficient funds. So it's disappeared from the Hungarian market completely. So these are the processes that are taking place, and they are relevant for the notion of media pluralism. So in the EU, we have the idea of media pluralism. We need both so-called external pluralism and internal pluralism. So the idea is that on the media landscape, you need both a plurality in ownership. So you have different outlets, but it is also very much important that you have plurality in content. So that you have different kind of point of views being present in in media. So if you, for example, discuss Hungary, and you may say that you may have external pluralism, there are different media outlets, but you will have very little or no internal pluralism, because everything presented there, when it comes at least to political issue, is pro-governmental. So one could argue that the media does not play its role at the moment. In the EU law, in this EU Media Freedom Act, I mentioned media pluralism is defined in such a way that covers both this external and internal dimension. So the question is, how can we preserve media pluralism in countries like that are subject to democratic backsliding? I will skip this. And it's also important that if you think from a human rights perspective, and if you discuss media pluralism is not just about, the state non-interfering into what's going on in media, but it is also, and this is under the human rights law in Europe, states have a positive obligation to put in place such a legal system that guarantees effective media pluralism. So it's not just about not interfering, not violating journalistic freedoms, for example, but generally building a system in which media freedom is preserved. I know that we are streamed on YouTube, so imagine that in 2015, in Turkey, the government decided to block YouTube whatsoever. There was no access to YouTube. And this case went to the European Court of Human Rights in Strasbourg. It was brought by actually academics law academics that specialize in media law. And the court in this case said that YouTube is very important, because what you find at YouTube is the content that is not available very often in a traditional media. So it's not just what we are discussing here. It's not just media pluralism as a certain concept, but we are talking also about the rights. We are talking about the right of individual to receive an impartial information, and this right should be safeguarded by the state. This is at least the idea in Europe. So we are talking about the right to free and plural media, and from citizen perspective, the fact that you live in Hungary and you have possibility to receive an information that covers, for example, corruption in Hungary, is an important element of this right that is enshrined in the European Convention on Human Rights. And these two elements of this internal and external media pluralism are key. And you can try to measure media pluralism. This is Media Pluralism Monitor, a study done by the center at the European University Institute in Florence, that is covering different elements. You may want to see that. So I will finish with just one more example, where you see a situation of we are in Hungary, and a case in which you have a foundation being created that where 400 media outlets in Hungary are grouped to this within this one media foundation called Keshma Foundation, that was founded just 4 months earlier. And this is another example of a situation when you have a certain, I would say, technique used on the market, market technique used by the pro-governmental businessmen to capture and to better control media, and this is happening within the legal context where the rule of law is not safeguarded, and this case is very interesting for the competition law. I will discuss tomorrow, because basically here in this case we don't see any scrutiny by competition authority of this transaction. You don't see any scrutiny by media authority, and we end up in the situation where 80% of media is controlled by one foundation that is pro-governmental. So there is no external pluralism, and there are lack of conditions for internal pluralism. So to sum up, I believe that democratic backsliding and the changes in the economy I discussed, they have various representations and consequences. Media freedom, media plurality, and citizens' right to receive information are affected. And the question is, what solutions can be proposed? How can we address the challenges I described? The question is whether competition law can help, or maybe we need a regulatory answer, or maybe I'm open for your thoughts on that. We cannot address these problems through law, and we should think about other solutions. So thank you very much. I am happy to address your questions. Thank you very much.
Hi, I was wondering what are sort of the current legal avenues for the European Commission to address the democratic backsliding? Has something happened already that would allow the European Commission to open an infringement procedure?
So this is a big debate, and I didn't discuss that. I did not mention that. Indeed, in last 8 years, I would say, European Commission was increasingly active in challenging some of the processes I discussed. So, for example, infringement proceedings were open. So infringement proceedings is the idea that the European Commission can bring the member state to the court for infringing the EU law. So there were cases concerning changes in Polish judiciary, for example, and there were a couple of cases, lots of discussion on that. Also, and that was actually maybe more effective than opening these purely legal avenues. Was using, I would say, a financial stick, so suspending some of the funds that Poland and Hungary was supposed to receive. Specifically to media markets, I would say that the EU attention was not that big, because some of these problems I discussed are happening within economy, within the market. So they are not necessarily happening through laws, So how can you deal with this Kashma, for example? How can you deal with this scenario of this businessman, kind of splitting with Orban? This is quite difficult for the EU to address. What they are proposing, and I will discuss this tomorrow, is this EU Media Freedom Act that covers different areas. Yes, but there are these infringement proceedings, but many scholars would argue that the EU did not do really enough to minimize the negative effects of what was going on in Poland and Hungary.
You alluded to last year's election in Poland that Law and Justice lost. And I wondered what you're thinking about the tension after that change in power, because there could, of course, number one, be a slow process of rebuilding the democratic institutions, the media plurality that has been damaged in this process of democratic backsliding. or a party that comes into that situation could have quite a strong incentive, I think, to take over those institutions that now wield quite a lot of power and that have proved quite effective in, basically winning election after election. And I wonder how you see that tension, that even a party that isn't illiberal as such might actually have quite a strong incentive of not starting that slow process of rebuilding.
I think this is yeah, a good question. When I say good question, I mean that I don't have a good answer, right? But I think there is such a risk. I agree, and I in the field I see your point that you might have a government that see, okay, so now I will, it's sort of now the justice will be on my side. Okay, so I will control public media. So the content there will be pro my government, and I will criticize law and justice. So I think we need a discussion, a debate in this respect in Poland. We need civil society and academics really today also, potentially challenging and criticizing the current government, whether they fulfill on their promises. I think it's too early to say. The processes are, it takes time, and I think their focus at the moment is really on judiciary. With public media, there is a discussion how I know that there is a project of a new law concerning public media that hopefully would safeguard the neutral content, let's say, in a public media in a better way. But I also see some problems. So, for example, one of the things that happened was this oil refiner in Poland, national champion, that took over local media. And I would expect that once we have new board of this state-owned enterprise, that they will simply sell it. Because why an oil refinery should have local media? Apparently, this is not happening as quickly as I would expect it to happen. I know that there were some firms interested in buying this local media outlet, but this is not happening. So it might be that there is a risk, and yeah. So we will see. Yeah, whatever.
Thank you. So I have a question about the direction of media's influence on democratic backsliding. Obviously, I think you did a good job of kind of showing the case for how once these governments come to power, they do try to consolidate the media to advance their own political positions. But I'm kind of curious as to the influence in the other direction. How much did media consolidation lead to these governments either gaining power, advancing their power, and how much do you kind of see that like the actual media institutions themselves driving this process, and how much of that occurred before Law and Justice or FEDSA actually gained power in the first place?
So the question is about media consolidation?
Yeah, basically, like how much did the media itself drive these outcomes rather than the government drive the media to help them create the outcomes?
I would say when you're asking about Poland, I think this is the main one of the maybe biggest differences between Poland and Hungary is that Poland preserved quite I would say diverse media landscape. So there was an important element for the debate. You still had independent private media in Poland. Of course, some of the processes are kind of coming from media, and for example, when you discuss this problem of polarization, that maybe media tend to create such a content that people will be divisive because this will be attracting attention. So this may kind of be an original reason that populist politicians recognize, and they can then create the content or propose the content that fits into into how the media operates. So this would be kind of linked to your let's say first hypothesis. But I think it's also true that the second one is true as well. So in a sense that there are certain processes that are started really that are coming from the government. So the government has a certain idea to capture media and is implementing policies to capture the media, and this leads to a situation where certain, if you see media as an element of checks and balances, they disappear. So it is an important way of entrenching their political power.
You mentioned briefly the YouTube case in Turkey. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more about the state of social media in Poland and Hungary, especially with internet censorship or takedown requests, and even like press expression, journalistic expression on social media. Are there any trends that you've seen more broadly?
So you know, when you come to the US, I think very often platforms are considered to be digital platforms as a threat to democracy, and I think this is true. but this Turkish case actually shows that you may have some of these digital platforms playing actually a positive role. So this would be my very general comment. Well, I would say that, you know, if you look at YouTube and social media, they were not subject. I guess this would be quite difficult to any governmental, so to say, action. So I would say that the content that is there, at least in the case of Poland, you know, remained relatively untouched by the state. But the question is whether you have this information bubbles there, etc. And the question is that the EU wants to address right now. I will mention it tomorrow towards the end very briefly, but there is a law on micro-targeting. So what can we do about micro-targeting? And there is a regulation in this respect. So I think there are problems with, you know, social media we need to address and I think having like an harmonized approach coming from the EU level is a good way to go, and maybe it may help in addressing some of the problems. For example, this law prohibits political micro-targeting 3 months before the election. The idea being that, you know, 3 months before, you don't have this tech. Yes, please.
How about other EU countries? We know, for example, it has been revealed that the Greek government would be using the Pegasus spyware. Also, traditionally, the Greek government gives hundreds of millions of dollars to government-friendly newspapers and media. How about these other countries?
For me, it's equally problematic. I think we also talking about, you know, certain political reality in the EU, and you may. I think sometimes the European Commission is criticized for being, you know, kind of stricter to one country and less strict towards the other. This is, you know, it might be a subjective thing, but I believe that, you know, once you have spyware being used in Germany or in Poland against journalists, this should be subject to the same level of scrutiny. And I know that there was an interest when it comes to the EU institution in what was going on in Greece. And if you think about this EU Media Freedom Act, the idea is to answer through a regulatory tool to the challenges that might exist. So one thing is, you know, to really explain and conduct an investigation concerning the actual things going on, let's say, in Greece or in Hungary. And the other thing is to consider how to design the institutions of EU member states to avoid such risks in the future. Yes, but I'm not saying, and this is what I said at the beginning, I don't think that the processes I discussed, so my focus was on Poland and Hungary, but these problems also exist in other EU member states, at least some.
Hi, I'm from India,
Yeah.
and we have the same problems: use of spyware, bribing keeping media on the hook by not releasing advertisements. We have two additional problems: that many of the key media houses get owned by business conglomerates, and the ruling party it has an extraordinary majority election after election. So the business houses are dependent on the government for contracts. There could be tax investigations. So, there is either overt censorship, overt towing the line, or self-censorship by the media. Now, my question is, how much can external forces, external bodies raise the issue and at least, put the government under some scrutiny, say the EU Parliament, United Nations, Stigler Center, other bodies of journalists? A statement like that puts the government under the mat. Do you think that helps at all foreign voices?
I think, this is in some instances, I think it might help. So I would be, I would encourage to produce such a statement and take action. And I follow the situation to an extent, at least in India, and I know that if you think about this populist playbook, I think some of the techniques that were used by Modi are similar to the one, for example, used by Orban. So I think, yes, we should. I think if there is, so to say, economic stick attached to it, then it might work. So if you consider, for example, this public private TV station TVN that is owned by the US capital had the problems with this prolongation of this concession. So the fact that US was interested, so yeah, and at the same time Poland is interested, I don't know, in buying arms from US industry and all this. So you may have, but this is I guess pure politics. Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you for all the questions. And